Since the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, global energy markets have become increasingly dependent on the Bab al-Mandab, another maritime chokepoint between Djibouti and Yemen that connects the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, and whose name literally translates to the Gate of Grief. For the past few weeks, the Iranians have been threatening to close the Bab al-Mandab, and on Monday evening, that's exactly what happened, with the Houthis, who control most of western Yemen and are widely considered an Iranian proxy, announcing a total blockade on everything coming in and out of Saudi Arabia's ports. Given that most of Saudi Arabia's trade goes via the Bab al-Mandab, and that any Houthi activity will probably also spook non-Saudi ships, in practice, it looks like another maritime chokepoint has now been shut off. So in this video, we're going to explain why Iran and the Houthis have decided to do this now, rather than 5 months ago, and what impact it could have on global energy markets. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. So let's start by explaining how and why the Bab al-Mandab has become so important to global energy markets. In short, after Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, through which something like 20 million barrels of oil, or 20% of the global market, usually passes every day, affected countries started trying to reroute oil that would have gone through the strait to other export routes. The UAE, for instance, was able to reroute about 1.5 million barrels a day to the port of Fujairah on the other side of the strait via its Adcop pipeline. Iraq was able to reroute about 300,000 barrels a day to Turkey via another pipeline, and, most significantly, Saudi Arabia was able to reroute about 4 million barrels a day to the Yanbu port on the Red Sea via its east-west pipeline. About 1 million of these new barrels went north to Europe via the Suez Canal, but the remaining 3 million barrels or so went south to Asia via the Bab al-Mandab. This was good news for global oil markets because it reduced the total supply shortfall from about 20 million barrels a day to more like 15 million barrels. But it did make the market, and especially the Saudis, more dependent on the Bab al-Mandab. Before the war, the Bab al-Mandab handled something like 2 million barrels a day, with most of this being Russian oil going to Asia via the Suez Canal and then the Bab al-Mandab. By June, this was up to 6 million, with the Saudis accounting for almost all of the increase. This is why any interruption to trade through the Bab al-Mandab would be very bad news for global energy markets. If Saudi exports through the Bab al-Mandab went to zero, which is what the Houthis want, it would essentially take the total shortfall up from about 15 million barrels a day, as a consequence of Hormuz being closed again, up to more like 18 million barrels. And this number could go higher if the Houthis end up being less discerning in their strikes, or if the mere threat of Houthi activity also deters non-Saudi ships from transiting. Now, some Saudi oil could maybe be rerouted via the Suez Canal, but A, fully loaded supertankers can't actually use the Suez Canal because they're essentially too big, and B, if you still want to sell it to Asia, this requires circumnavigating Africa, which adds about 6,000 kilometers, or about 2 weeks, to the journey. This means there will inevitably be less oil reaching the market, which means that, if they want to avoid an acute energy crisis, the rest of the world will have to run down their already depleted stockpiles at an even faster rate. In this context, it's also worth noting that, in the past couple of days, Iran has threatened to hit the other export routes that Gulf countries have used to circumvent the Strait of Hormuz, including the UAE's Fujairah port and Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, which would put even more strain on the market. Now, at this point, you might be asking, why now? After all, you might have expected Iran to have closed the Bab al-Mandab at the same time as it closed the Strait of Hormuz, way back in early March, to impose maximum damage on global energy markets. So why has it instead taken 5 months? Well, there are sort of two possible explanations here. The first is that it's possible Iran was essentially keeping an arrow in its quiver to give it an extra bit of leverage in the future, a means to escalate even further and thus deter the US. If this is the case, then it looks like Iran has decided to activate the Houthis, who are widely considered an Iranian proxy, and close the Bab al-Mandab as a sort of response to America's decision to restart the war. The second possible explanation, however, is that the Houthis aren't just doing it for Iran. Rather, the main reason they're closing the Bab al-Mandab is to retaliate against the Saudis. For context, the Houthis and Saudi Arabia have basically been at each other's throats since the Saudis intervened in Yemen's civil war in 2015, after the Houthis ousted the internationally recognized government from Sana'a, Yemen's capital and the largest city. The two sides reached a ceasefire in April 2022, which actually held up remarkably well until earlier this month, when the Houthis opened Sana'a airport to allow an Iranian plane to fly some Houthi officials back to the country, the first direct flight between Yemen and Iran since 2015. The Houthis accused Saudi Arabia of deploying fighter jets to scare the plane off, but it was still ultimately able to land at Sana'a. The Houthis then sort of pushed their luck by using the same plane to fly a Houthi delegation from Sana'a to Tehran to attend the funeral of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. An Iranian plane then flew the delegation back to Sana'a, but this time the Saudis decided they'd had enough and attacked Sana'a airport directly, forcing the plane to change course and land in the Red Sea port of Hodeidah. The Houthis then retaliated by firing missiles and drones at Abha airport in southern Saudi Arabia last week, bringing the 4-year truce to an abrupt end and threatening to restart Yemen's civil war. Anyway, the point we're trying to make is that whilst these two explanations aren't mutually exclusive and the Houthis are clearly being egged on by Iran, their decision to close the Bab al-Mandab could nonetheless be more about Saudi Arabia than Iran or America. This is, to be fair, how the Houthis have framed it, and explains why they're specifically targeting Saudi traffic. Nonetheless, even if this is how the Houthis want to frame it, it's hard to see how this won't get folded into the wider war, thus threatening to further expand a conflict that's already enveloped most of the region.
Greenland. For decades, it's been viewed as little more than a giant ice sheet on the edge of the world. A massive ice fortress that most of us only ever saw from 30,000 feet on a flight to somewhere else. However, that ice is receding, and as it does, the world's superpowers are beginning to move in. At TLDR, we've spent almost 10 years explaining things from behind a desk, but some stories are too big for our studio. So to understand why this island, and the Arctic more generally, has suddenly become the most valuable real estate on Earth, we had to go there. As you'll soon discover though, this isn't just a political briefing hosted from the cold. We're hiking through the wild, discovering melting icebergs, and uncovering the rusting remnants of secret military projects abandoned in the snow.
I used to think I understood what cold was, but I was lying to myself.
Over 3 episodes, we're asking, what's the big deal with Greenland? From the scramble for rare earth minerals, to the new battlefield for Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. We're camping out in the glaciers that are changing our climate and discovering the country caught in the middle of this global tug of war.
This is funny to you, Jet.
It will be funny to you in the future.
Hello.
Hello, deep there.
Jesus Christ. That's the whale.
Right wheel.
Rather appropriately for the world's largest island, this is the biggest project we've ever taken on. A documentary about the beauty, power, and future of our planet. Coming this summer exclusively to TLDR Party members. If you're not a TLDR Party member already, you can sign up right now. Members not only get access to 2 long documentaries like this one, but they also get access to the audio versions of every article in our magazine Too Long, each narrated by the writers of those articles, allowing you to listen along to it all. You also get access to our behind-the-scenes podcast, The Bullpen, access to our extra podcasts, The Last Move and The Last Word, our brand new news quiz, plus our brand new UK politics podcast, Andemonium. Becoming a member costs £3.99 a month, but for the very best deal, you should grab the Too Long and TLDR Party bundle. That way you get both our quarterly magazine Too Long, as well as access to all of the benefits of TLDR Party, for a very discounted rate. Plus, if you use code Greenland, we'll give you an extra £4 off your first bundle payment, making it basically the same price as a standalone subscription. Find out more and support the channel at toolong.news/party.